Hello. Thank you for a little bit of hush, because I'd like to go back to something that Christa said earlier today. We did have that very nice message from the King, and we don't have royalty. But I think when you look at this table here, what you have is health and safety gold. This is the gold standard of health and safety across Europe. People who know what went on when the agency started. And I'm interested to hear a little bit about the establishment of the agency, which I hope you are as well. And also, towards the end of the panel session, if you have a burning question, you can put your hand up and we'll try and see if we can trick one or two of them out with a difficult question. But anyway, let's kick this off. And I think the first question has to go to Jesús. So it has to go to Jesús. When in doubt, always ask Jesús. So Jesús, one of the things we were talking about in the agency was that we have many very young people working in the agency now, and they would not remember. I'm not suggesting that you're not very young. I'm simply saying we have some quite young new staff members who would be interested to know, what was the thinking of the European Commission at the time the agency was set up? What was it like in the preparatory meetings? And why, of all of the cities in Europe, did the agency come to Bilbao? Could you explain to our audience?
Thank you, Brenda. This is a very good question. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very honored to be the first in this panel to speak. Well, this was a very special moment in the process of the European construction. All of you probably remember Jacques Delors. Jacques Delors was a president of the European Commission between 85 and 95. And he was a strong fighter for constructing Europe. And at that time, it was a clear objective to consolidate the internal market. Until that moment, since the creation, the European communities at that time were mainly a market with the free movement of circulation of goods, capital, services, labor, but it was not really a strong social dimension. And Jacques Delors had this strong idea of consolidating the internal market. This is why the European Single Act was adopted in 86 and entered into force in 85. And the idea was to consolidate this strong social dimension of the social market. And for doing that, it was considered necessary to give some power to the health and safety at work legislation. And this is why, as my Director General explained before, it was a specific legal basis for creating legislation. And a lot of legislation was created at that time. In 89, the Framework Directive, as you know, or the other directives successively. And this was, this spirit of creating something new. And it became evident that something new had to be created in terms of communication, of awareness, of networking also. This was also a process of, let's say, agencification, it was called, because the European Commission was doing everything at that time, information, networking, and so on, but it was felt that some specific aspects can be dealt better by specific bodies, and this was the idea of creating a specialized body on information, on communication, on awareness raising. And it was the idea of also a strong partnership. Europe is about creating partnership. Stronger, together we are stronger, no? And this was behind the idea of creating the agency. And this is why, after the European year of 1992, which is was very powerful in disseminating the idea of prevention, it was felt that something more innovative had to be done in terms of prevention, not only of legislation, but also prevention. And this is why the agency was proposed by the Commission in 91 and finally created in 94. This was part of this very exciting, but at the same time very, let's say, comprehensive process of creating something new. And at that time, it was decided by the ministers of the European Council that the agency was in Spain. But at that time, Felipe González was the president of the Spanish government, and his government decided to place the agency here in Bilbao. Well, probably at that time there was a very good relation with the parties here and with the Basque government, and this might be one of the key elements for the setting the agency in Bilbao. Well, now we see that this was a very good decision and a very successful element. That's part of this starting history.
Part of the story. Now, at the same time, Tom Walsh, you were head of the Irish Health and Safety Authority. You're now regarded as the wise man of health and safety in Europe, and you're coordinator of the government group in the advisory committee. You were following the discussions in council. And what were they like at the time?
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to add a little to what Jesús has just said, that the establishment of the agency was, in fact, the brainchild of the then director in Luxembourg, Dr. Bill Hunter from the United Kingdom. He saw the looming kind of resource constraints at European level, and at the same time recognized the desirability of having a body which would provide the, preferably located close to Luxembourg, in fact, at the time, which would provide the Commission and the various stakeholders with expert information and research and so on OSH. And of course, the agency was allocated to Bilbao. And it's wonderful to be back in Bilbao again after 20-25 years. It's now such a vibrant, ergonomically and economically successful city, and it's a pleasure to come here. But the discussions in the council weren't very controversial, because I think the dynamic was different then to what it is now, and the Commission wasn't challenged as much in what it had to do, which was probably a good thing, because it succeeded in putting through rather quickly the framework directive and the initial block of directives, and also the regulation. If anything, an area of contention was outside the regulation, and this question of the balance on the board, where the governments were in a majority voting position, largely because of the financial aspects. But I think that didn't cause major difficulty. I think there was some initial disappointment, if I may say so, when it came to Bilbao, because it was against the idea that it should be close by and contactable easily and that, you know, but that very quickly dissipated, and it's quite evident now from the place that the agency has in the bigger scheme of OSH things, that and its record of work supporting the stakeholders is really beyond exemplary. And the portfolio that it carries on with, we heard of it earlier on. If I might mention one, national strategies, it's done a lot of work on that. It's very important. Launched by Ramon Biasca as director, and here locally, William Coburn helps enormously. But at the beginning, I think it was challenging and scary, a very, very small body facing the whole of Europe in health and safety information and research. And, you know, that's history now, because so much has been achieved. But I think we should mention people like Ulrich Riese, Finn Schei, Martin Den Held, and Valerie Robinson, and others who contributed so much at the very beginning. I'm sorry if I've left anybody out. Can I go on and say something else, Brenda?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. No,
you're
it's
here
just
to chat. You're here to talk.
Okay, yeah. No, it's just interesting that we've heard about the single market and the need for a floor of protection and that. And of course, next week marks the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the Framework Directive. You know, and the Framework Directive has been evaluated. 30 years on, it's fit for purpose, doesn't need to be changed, and it's a wonderful instrument. You know, okay, there was some work to be done on some of the directives, and we're busy with that at the moment, and it's going well. But it moved things enormously from the historical past of applying purely prescriptive legislation in a reactive way to this a dual approach in a way to the management of occupational safety and health. So it put duties of care on both employers and workers, and that didn't go well down in the council as far as the worker side was concerned. And then it inserted the various requirements on risk assessment, provision of information, training, consultation, participation, and health surveillance. And that was the big edifice that was constructed. But it wasn't enough to just leave that in place. Something had to be done about it, and we've heard reference to implementation. And it provided a major challenge to the national authorities to act in a dual role. They were obliged on the one hand to enforce the legislation, but at the same time to advocate and promote the legislation. And it wasn't easy in the beginning, quite honestly. And when it comes to enforcement, member states were required to bring into force the laws, the regulations, etc., to comply with the various directives. But of course, it left the imposition of sanctions to be dealt with in line with member states' national legal systems and in the context of subsidiarity. And if I reflect again that in our country, prior to this type of legislation, breaches of the pre-existing legislation attracted very, very low sanctions. Breaches were regarded more of a social misdemeanor rather than a criminal act, especially where workers were killed or very badly injured. So we in Ireland, we had a meeting with our Irish Attorney General to talk about this question: how could we get the judiciary to increase the level of fines in that and without interfering with their role? And we had to explain the dual role, and he said to us we were quite schizophrenic, in fact. You know. And however, it did work, and things did improve. And in some countries now you can see very, very large fines imposed on big companies where workers have, there's evidence there to show that the legislation was breached, and that in order to have an exemplary effect across employments, you do need this. In one country, there are actually sentencing guidelines applying to the OSH legislation. And the results in terms of reducing debts are quite evident from the information we have. But if I may make a point that there's not a common approach across the member states on an approach to sanctions and levels of penalties in due deference to the national legal systems and to the role of the legal system, the judiciary in the various countries. But I wonder, could it be said that where employers are not robustly pursued through enforcement, especially in the case of very serious or fatal accidents, does an unfair economic advantage apply? Okay, I'm thinking of the single market now again. And is there a case for working towards some sort of level playing field in this regard? Is this the missing piece in the comprehensive jigsaw that exists in OSH in terms of moving things forward and further reducing overall levels of fatalities, which are still too high in the community? So I'll just throw that out and finish by wishing the agency every success in the future as it continues.
Thank you, Tom. And we are going to be looking a little bit more at the future in the next panel as well, but we may come back to you. So William, will you hold that thought, and maybe you can come back to that when we're looking at the future later on. I can see him smiling at me with gritted teeth. And Hans-Horst Konkolewsky, you were the first director of the agency from 1996, and you remained here until 2006. I think what many of us, you've mentioned some of the early pioneers, Tom. I do wonder, what was it like coming with your suitcase to Bilbao? I wonder, did you have an office? And well, where did you go? And who did you find first? What was the story like? What was it like being given a blank page to establish an agency in Bilbao?
Well, we have a lot of time, so... No, but I was 43 years old, so I didn't fear anything. And basically, I would like to summarize it in three words. No? it was a challenge, but it was also a privilege, and it was a pleasure, or it was fun. And I will try to explain why. The challenge, I think, is obvious. We are celebrating the founding regulation of this agency, and if you read it through, you see that it's very framework-like, which is wise. It puts out some general objectives, the structure in terms of the organization, in particular as regards the governance structure, the budget, the rules of the director, and so on and so forth. But that's it. And when I started, I had my employers in front of me. There were 48 of them. There were 15 from each of so there were 15 employers, 15. So it was a quite of an impressive situation to face. But the challenge of having no blueprint, the challenge of having no staff, the challenge of having no office, which is not absolutely correct, I'll give you more details about that, but no real building for the agency, of having no program, was of course immense, no? But at the same time, it was natural because we started something from the beginning, and this is my second point, the issue of a privilege, because what more of a privilege can it be for any one of us to be in charge with building up a new European occupational safety and health organization, contributing to what's dear to all of us, the social dimension of this fantastic European integration project that has brought peace to our region, but still had some deficits in terms of aligning safety and health standards, establishing the level playing field that DG was talking about, and really trying to reduce even more accidents and harm at work. So that was something I think that really was felt, and not only by me. I think this was felt by everybody, and still is felt by everybody in the EU-OSHA, in the agency. So being there, building something that has an importance for millions of workers, of persons, of workers, of families in the European Union. So that was really a privilege, a once-in-a-lifetime experience that I must say I was really very happy about. Then we come to the pleasure, because implementing this and writing this on this blank sheet of paper, okay, I gave my election speech where I outlined some objectives, year 1, year 3, year 5, because I had a 5-year mandate. So I had a bit of the ideas of what to reach, the church, so to say, you know, that you can see in front of you, the town where you want to go, but how to go there. The first pleasure were a handful of member states and institutions that were ready to follow my call to support me in this very, very first month and the first year. And you have to remember, a recruitment process in the European Union takes time, Christa, no? So I would normally first have started activities maybe in 6, 9, 12 months after I was recruited. But thanks to those friendly governments, friendly institutions, we actually had a small team, and Tom referred to it already, a small team that accompanied me from the very beginning. So filling the page was actually a team effort. And I really would like to ask those of you that are here, and there are quite a few, to rise up and give this team a warm round of applause, because they are actually the authors, the designers, the architects of what the agency is today. So please stand up, Ulrich, Finn, all the ones that have been here from the very beginning. A warm round of applause. Marijo. Up and rise, up. So. They have been incredible. They have really been incredible because, as I said, there was no, and it was not absolutely, you can imagine, we had some temporary offices in Alameda de Mazarredo number 66. And if you look up Alameda de Mazarredo number 66, today it's actually the most prestigious 5-star hotel of town, which is the Grand Dominé, just in front of the Guggenheim. But when we were there, we had been given, and that was the effort of the European Commission to provide us with some temporary offices. So there are just a couple of offices that we had to share with a fantastic look to the building site of the Guggenheim Museum. So, and this team had to take care of everything. And I really would like to really appreciate the support that you gave me during this time. And people were doing stuff that they were not exactly trained to. No? Martin became the designer of our administration because he's Dutch, and I thought that's good. No, he can take care of resources and so on and so forth. No? And so the rules were divided amongst this team, and it was thanks to their skills, thanks to their enthusiasm, and thanks to that we shared, I think, this feeling, this is something special that we have going, this pioneer spirit that we felt then. This pioneer spirit, I think, went on for several years, but it was really that beginning you're asking about what made it special. What also made it a pleasure was, in fact, working with the administrative board. It was a bit scaring, sitting alone in front of this huge board, all my employers. But in fact, they were extremely, let's say, open. And I think one of the reasons is that the agency does not come out of the blue, as we heard before. Safety and health at work are an issue that has been discussed for a long time. There are institutions, strong institutions, a strong social dialogue. So it was placed in let's say, already on a direction that was given. And therefore, this was very helpful to have those skilled board members, tripartite board members, commission representatives, who actually were quite courageous and I think appreciated that we took a very dynamic approach to things. So we established a very ambitious time schedule to establish the agency. We established a very ambitious work program. And I really would like to thank also all those of you present here, the first board, administrative board. Maybe you also would rise up once again, and let's give all these board members a warm round of applause for their courage and for their vision and for their support. So let's see how many we still have around today with us.
Yes, Tom.
So, board members.
I think you might be alone, Tom.
Board member. No, but so their support was really critical, no? Because they had to give the trust to this little team, to my leadership and our joint efforts, and to support us all the way, and they did. And the other thing I want to mention is because we started pretty soon building the focal point network, because that's what makes the agency special compared to any other institution that is based on a network philosophy. You don't have a center and a periphery, you have just a network. And the agency's role is to manage these network relations and facilitate the information exchange, the collaboration on a tripartite basis between these, all these focal points and activities. And I think that was another thing that the focal points showed to be very flexible. Just to mention one detail, because when we started, as you know, there's a language regime in the European Union where every country is entitled to speak its own language, as we also heard our Spanish acting Secretary of State refer to. But I asked the question, well, should we use our resources on interpretation services or should we use them on activities? So could we agree on English? And it happened. It happened. So that showed that the attitude was really the benefit of this little entity, and people were extremely flexible in doing so. And again, there, I don't know who was on the first focal points, if there still are some, but I also think they deserve a warm round of applause. And maybe if there are a few around, there might be not, but let's give them a warm round of applause in any case, because they were very, very critical.
Well, actually, Horst, you gave me a nice segue there, because the next question was going to be about the focal points to Martina Häckel-Bucher, who is, of course, the Austrian focal point. And you were there right at the beginning, weren't you, Martina? And you were involved in, I suppose, suddenly becoming involved, not only working at national level, but working at European level. And then maybe having to go back to Vienna from a meeting in Bilbao trying to explain that. And then also having to meet people from other countries who were doing the same in building up a focal point network. What was that like?
Thank you so much for inviting me and also giving the Focal Point group a voice. It's my voice today, but actually, in my opinion, it's my favorite group here in the agency, the Focal Point group. And thank you, Horst, for saying we are a quite flexible group, and I became Focal Point after my maternity leave. So, as you said, you were quite motivated, and for me it was after a lot of sleepless night, I knew it couldn't get worse. So for me it was coming to the agency, I was highly motivated. But actually it turned out to be for me a great success story, because I liked it so much to work with, on one side, with my colleagues here in Bilbao from all member states. The success story in Austria, it was a story with some rocks in between, because when I, going back 20 years, the thing with the networking wasn't that popular. So it was more, I work in a ministry, I come from a ministry, it was a little bit like more this, I'm not responsible for this, I'm not responsible for that, and so on. And Horst, he came up and said, you are the focal point, you manage everything. So it's not up with responsibilities, it's just you are just doing the things, yeah. And then I was really motivated, had my first national focal point network meeting, and I think I was talking for 3 hours and trying to explain and motivate, and people were sitting here looking at me, not even smiling, I think. And then I asked, do you have any question? Do you want to bring in something? And it was no, so I talked and talked and talked. And this was the first meeting, and it got better. And now I have a wonderful and brilliant national network, and they're supporting me a lot. And on the other side, it is working as a focal point is a little bit like sitting between two chairs, you know, because you have your home country, and then you have to work on the agenda of EU-OSHA, and you want to be good in both parts. So sometimes it's a little bit the problem with the resources, but I think me and a lot of other focal points, we just, we stay a little bit longer in the office, and then I think we managed and fixed everything. And one thing I learned here in Bilbao is to feel a little bit more like to be European, because working for a European network is special. So looking beyond the borders, and one short story I want to tell, it's because Horst had brilliant ideas, so every time we came, he came up with a new idea, and you have to think about it. When I started as a focal point, the thing with the internet wasn't functioning these days, but Horst had this idea from this global internet website, and then he said, okay, we built up this website, and then we had these little flags, and then we had these little boxes, and we needed a lot of information. And then he put a little pressure on us and said, okay, and in 2 months we will have a press conference. I come to Austria and we will present this website. And I think 3 days before, we had no information available which we could put on the web. So I think I was till 12 o'clock in the evening in the office trying to get something to fill these boxes. But finally, we managed.
You managed it. Well done, Martina. I would like to say, some of you perhaps don't know, but all of our focal points from all over Europe have been visiting Bilbao this week to have a focal point meeting and to attend this as well. So they're all here, which is very nice. Jukka, Takala, if we move along, you took over as director in 2006, and coming from the ILO with its tripartite structure, of course, you were well used to, let's say, working within a tripartite framework. But under your leadership, the agency made some changes in direction, particularly in its online work in terms of developing tools and the development of OIRA, and you also oversaw the birth of Essener, which Joost Korte mentioned earlier this afternoon in his speech. So how would you describe, coming from Geneva to Bilbao, how would you describe this exciting time in your career?
Thank you, Brenda. Maybe I start a little bit from the history as well. When I started my work, I was inheriting quite a number of things. Number one, there was a huge office, what I wasn't used to that at all. Then I got a brand new car, BMW over there waiting. Thank you, well done. And then I inherited really great stuff, and I think that's really important thing too. I think nobody can do anything. Okay. This is something what you cannot always understand. When I came from the ILO, I couldn't think that if I don't do some of the work and somebody else will do that. If I'm at home, I don't have the vacuum cleaning, I know that somebody else will do it, and somebody's sitting over there. But at the same time, when I came to the office, there was somebody who was reading my emails and replying to my emails, and that was really, really exceptional. In the international organization, that kind of practice had disappeared already. There was no real proper staff to do work together with people such as myself. I think this is a really important thing, that you have proper and highly, highly qualified people who are more qualified than yourself in doing that work what they did. So I think this is something really important thing to keep in mind. The important thing related to, I always appreciated the idea of having both evidence and communication together. If you have evidence and you have no real communication, campaigning, media and so on, comes like a dead letter, but you have somebody will put it in the data in the bookshelf and never taken up and will be dusty for years over there. On the other hand, if you have communication without evidence, it comes like a propaganda. And there's no meaning whatsoever. I think this kind of thing is really important in the agency, and I think probably this is unique in the field of occupational safety and health, at least all over the world. I haven't seen anything like that in that kind of manner what has been done in the European agency. One part of that evidence component was the European Survey of European Survey on New and Emerging Risks, and I think this is something what was not inherited by the past anymore, but done by our staff themselves. Yes, it was done by my time, but I didn't start the whole process. Who did that? Some person who is not today here. That person is Eusebio Real Gonzalez. And I think we have to really, really understand that there are people who are not anymore with us, who have done great, great work for us. We always stand on the shoulders of the past giants, and I think that's exactly what I did. So Eusebio and his staff and his team, they did really excellent work, following a little bit on the European Foundation work, which is doing much more research and doing bigger surveys and things like that. But that created also something what is useful not only for identifying the risks of new and emerging risks, but also what are the possible solutions. So once you look at what are the real problems, you immediately find out that this kind of risks are here and that kind of risks are there. That gives us a clear picture. How can we make a difference in those particular areas? So I think there's been strong points. I'm really happy to see that that continues and will continue in the future as well. Do you want still to have some longer stories? Maybe somebody...
I just want to say that I think what you said about SEB has resonated with a lot of us, and particularly with a lot of the staff from the agency, because many of us still miss him acutely. as you know, because he was so loved. So thank you for, giving the credit to Seb where that credit was due. I'll ask you all for a last word in a moment. First of all, I'm going to talk to Christa. So, Christa, you are the only director who had experience working in the agency before you became the director. So that makes you unique. You had you had seen, you had seen how it worked. The other thing that made it unique, of course, was you were our first woman director. And one of the things that you did, we all remember quite well when you took over, was you initiated and set in motion a major strategic discussion about the role of the agency and the place of the agency in the future. And that was a long process because you decided that you were going to consult with all our partners and all our stakeholders. So how did that go, and how do you feel that for you the direction then of the agency moved forward? And the other question I wanted to ask you more than other directors, I think, is you have had to bear the brunt of budget cuts. And with respect to the colleagues from the Commission, they're very good at coming down here and saying, we must do more with less, which is very eloquent. It's a very eloquent way of saying, you're not getting any more money this year. So that's the second part. I wonder, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brenda. When I started in 2011, and I will follow up what Jukka and what Horst said, is, of course, I met very skilled, engaged, and motivated staff. I mean, this is the great basis for developing further the agency. And at the same time, when I started, we got on the table the evaluation of what the agency is doing. So we had a report of the evaluation, when there were recommendations. Secondly, we had to face, and this was then the next step, to develop a multi-annual strategic program, 2014 to 2020, and we knew that we have to change our way of planning, of our way of budgeting. So we started to change the whole process of planning. That means we changed to activity-based budgeting, activity-based management. We had the obligation to plan for the next 3 years, which was, of course, a change. Then, and this still Seb was there, which was, of course, that was great to have him also in the management team for discussion. He always had great ideas. But what we did is we tried to bring together all activities of units in one activity. I had, when I started, but my advantage was I worked in Germany on the initiative New Quality of Work, where we also had packages in this initiative. That means a project starting and not ending with the publication, but thinking about what will I do, promoting, distributing, initiating discussions over the next years. That means for the multi-annual strategic program, we, in the agency, internally defined 6 priority areas, where we thought this is not only for today, this is also in the future-looking priorities. So we defined these 6 priorities, and then we developed activities, but activities not segmented into content, distribution, report, and so on, but it is one package starting at the development of the content. Even now, that's new ex-ante assessment. Is it really useful to spend the money, and does it have an impact, positive impact on OSH? Then the planning, implementation, and this was done hand in hand with the governing board, with the focal point, with our experts. And in the end, we changed our way of developing and also working together in the agency. That means all units had to start at the same time, had to think about what to do after the report, had to think about who to talk at policy level and so on. So this was a bit different from former years. And also the activity-based management, budgeting was totally new, and I have to say it was not an easy time. That for 3 years we had to think about which resources do we need for which activity. That means budget, time allocation, staff, and this was done for the first time. And of course, this helped us a lot. I see all my colleagues, staff members, for the planning today. It's really efficient planning. We have, let's say, we have a better view on what's needed over the next years, the allocation of resources. So I think that was a big step in the right direction. And of course then, and this was still Sepp also's input, and he did a great job, the foresight activities. I think these is one of the flagship. Thinking about digitalization, I think our foresight activity on digitalization was now a really great success, but also showed us what we have to do in the future in that area. So we are now starting to do a lot in that area. And I think what else I would say that was one of my objectives, was to have a very good and close relationship to DG Employment and to B3. And I think this we managed. I would say we had on a regular basis meetings, exchange of information, and the positive impact was that in all strategic papers, communication of the Commission, the agency got major roles. Which of course means a lot of work, but that's our job, and I think all of us, we appreciate it. So this was really, I think, went in the right direction, and also now we are using more ICT tools in all our processes, which also is providing efficiency, but also transparency to our stakeholders. And you asked the cut. I think also we had to cut 10% since 2012. We did it, but what we managed is we are looking into all our procedures, processes, also IT, and where we could gain more efficiency by reorganizing.
Yeah. Thank you, Christa. I'm looking at the clock. We're just slightly over, but not much. Anybody with a burning question from the audience, or a comment even? Because if not, I will go back to the panelists for a final word. No, I don't see anybody. Okay, Tom, what would be your last comment to us today? In 1 minute.
Yeah, I'd just like to pay tribute to, am I on? I'd just like to pay tribute to tripartism in occupational safety and health, and its relationship with the Commission. This is a unique element in the European Union, including both here in the agency and in our tripartite advisory committee. And I think it's our guarantee for future success in this area.
Thank you. Jukka?
Yeah, continuing exactly from that, when people ask how things have been organized in the European agency in the past, I thought that, yes, we had first, like Hans-Horst thought 50 members of the governing body, then we had finally 27 plus 27 plus 27, and when Croatia became 28, plus the European Economic Area countries, so comes all these trade unions and employers and so on, all the countries, much, much bigger than the agency itself. And people think that you must be crazy. Particularly in Asia, they don't understand. I don't think there's nothing crazy in that idea. I think the thinking is absolutely correct. If you don't have that kind of tripartite collaboration, you will have much more difficulties in identifying the same solutions in 28 countries individually again. So this is much easier to find in one single place and then work together with a common solution. Not everything can be done in the member state, neither in America nowadays. I think we need all common work which can be better done at the common level and can never be done by any individual country level. I think, thank you workers, thank you employers, and thank you governments for being great workers and great support for that.
Hans-Horst?
Well, I think that the agency today is an established part, so to say, not only of the European but also of the global OSH governance. Because now I've worked also a few years outside the EU, so I know that the agency is always looked at, and the European Union in general and the Commission are looked at with admiration about the social model that we have and the high safety and health standards. So I think that what started with the transfer of the European weeks from the Commission to the agency by the end of the 90s and suddenly gave the agency a face and some content that went beyond small boxes to fill with legislation, but gave it a direction and again, the courage of the board to agree on its third EU week. So the campaign on stress at work, ladies and gentlemen. I couldn't believe my own eyes when I saw that. And that was the priority. It was established. It was voted at the #1. So the agency actually carried out the first European campaign towards psychosocial risks in the early 2000s. So there is a momentum of promotion. There is a momentum of really becoming a driver of occupational safety and health. And the message or comment I would like to add at the end is I really wish the agency a lot of success in continuing what it's doing. I would appreciate it more success from the European Parliament. Unfortunately, there's, I don't know, from the European Parliament, anybody here, but the European Parliament.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Becker.
So a message to the European Parliament. Yeah. I would really ask for more support to take on a role on behalf of the European Union in promoting safe and healthy working standards, not only within the EU, but also outside. Because at the end of the day, if we want to protect our high standards, we have to promote them also outside. So the EU is a reference, the agency is an international reference, not only for passive information, but actually for being drivers in promoting safety and health at work.
Thank you. Jesús, can I ask you to be brief? All these messages, do you think you're going to give us more money?
That's difficult. But in any case, I would say, heading to the eminent people here, that in my view, the agency represents very well the values of Europe. Europe is based in, we are united in the diversity. We are very diverse in our traditions, in our practices, in our systems, in our evolution. But Europe is somehow taking the best out of our diversity. And the agency is doing that very, very, very well. And this is a strong sense of compromise. In the governing board, now the management board, where the strategic decisions are taken, the vast majority of decisions, you all know, is taken by consensus. There is no, voting is quite rare, actually. I don't know which percentage, but this is, in my view, a very good sign of this sense and spirit of compromise, which is in line with the spirit European values. No? And I admire a lot the strong sense of community the agency has created. We are all a community, this belonging to a family to promote better occupational safety and health standards in Europe and outside Europe, as Hans-Horst mentioned. And the power of networking, the power of partnerships, these are also European values. I think we can be all very proud of being part of this beautiful journey.
Thank you. Martina?
Yeah. too bad
From
that the Commission didn't give more money, because now I have the strong feeling that the focal points have to step in and so close this small financial gap with our motivation and spirit. But actually today we finished the focal point meeting and we had really good discussions, and we had also, and this is, I would like to thank also the agency staff to being so supportive to us as a group, and I think we had really 1.5 day great discussions among ourselves. And for me it's a little bit like, not when I come to Bilbao, it's like a little bit coming home, and working in this network, it is a little bit like working with friends, and therefore I enjoy to come here very, very much. And Christa, for sure, we will work harder and carry out more activities, and yeah, we will go on.
Thank you, Martina. Christa, do you want to wait until after the second panel, or would you like to make a final comment now?
Very short. I'm very happy, I have to say, because all what we discussed, the achievement until today, now over the 25 years, is great. And we have proof. That means evaluation, we have an engagement survey, we have feedback today. The speeches, I have to say, it was great to hear that, and I have, I know I have this excellent staff. I have this excellent board and the excellent focal points. Really, therefore I'm so happy. I only would mention that I know other agencies with their board, and we have a board which is really very engaged in getting an agreement to find a solution within the 3 groups. And there I would like to also thank the current chair, Christa, but also Gertrud Brendel, government, and Karoli Georgi. These 3 chairs were really leading the management board to get an agreement in that time, and I think this is something which is really for me, therefore easy to handle, and as I said, focal point great, so I'm really happy today.
Okay, well,